Jeff Gallashaw, and I'm back with another episode of Unfinished Business, not Unfinished Business Rough Cuts, which you can catch on YouTube, by the way. Unfortunately, a great director died by the name of Tony Scott, who was one of my favorite directors. Let me tell you a little about me and Tony Scott. Unfortunately, I never met the man, but I hate to say it, and this might be a little controversial, I like his films more than Ridley Scott. Don't get me wrong, I understand Ridley Scott has made a lot of masterpieces, which I am a fan of. But Tony Scott reveled in the type of cinema that you could rewatch over and over and was just plain old fun and entertaining. His first big film, The Hunger, with David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve. Now, while this is seen as a classic, and I can see why, all the hazy camera work, the neon lights, you know, dealing with 1980s New York, I have to say I'm not the biggest fan of this film, and I'll tell you why. I think it's because this film was built up over the years, and I only saw it a few years ago, and while I'm expecting this near underrated classic gem, I mean, the film, I have to say, for me, style-wise, is great. Story-wise, it's interesting, but I also have to say it's just okay. The next film, surprisingly, one of his biggest movies, which I have not seen, Top Gun in 1986. Now, I will explain. I think it's sort of like Stanley Kubrick, where I have freely admitted that there are at least 3 Stanley Kubrick films that I have not watched, and I'm slow to watch them because once I see them, I know I've seen his whole filmography and there's nothing new to come from the man. I like the fact that I haven't seen it and that one day, the right time, I'm going to watch it, discover it. I know it's not going to change my view of cinema, but you know, it's sort of like, this is my final goodbye. I'll see you, Tony. The next film is Beverly Hills Cop 2. This one took a really different take than Beverly Hills Cop because it was more action-packed and, you know, more action-packed and more comedy, whereas the first one was more of a fish out of water tale. It kind of became a signature style for the Simpson-Bruckheimer films. Even when Michael Bay started making films, you could say he was partially influenced by Tony Scott. The next film, Revenge, with Kevin Costner, which is probably another reason why it's another one of his films that I haven't watched. Then there is one of my favorites, The Last Boy Scout. Oh my God. The Last Boy Scout, I saw in theaters 3 times. I mean, it had ultra violence, it had action, it had Bruce Willis in kick-ass mode. He's an alcoholic, but yet he's got morals, but yet he's on the other side of the moral train, and he's solving this mystery. And even though it's got tons of action, it has a great script by Shane Black. Next is True Romance, which is actually my favorite Tony Scott film, with a script by Quentin Tarantino. Let's face it, we all know what True Romance is about. It's a great film. Even though, you know, say what you will about Tarantino, it's inventive, it didn't reinvent the wheel, but it's always exciting. And if you look at it, it has quite the all-star cast, even before they were stars or while they were stars. I mean, come on, Christopher Walken, Dennis Hopper, and I don't care what Edwin says, Christian Slater is a good actor. Next is Crimson Tide, where we kind of more, there's action, but this is more emotional, intense action, you know, between Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman on this submarine where they're not quite sure, you know, whether the orders are to fire these missiles or not, and there's this internal struggle. And the thing I like about this film is that nobody is exactly right and nobody is exactly wrong. Next is The Fan. Okay, it's not a great film, but I could see what he was attempting here. Then there's Enemy of the State with Will Smith. Now, I actually really enjoyed this film, and one of the more interesting aspects is that you could kind of say it's a sequel to The Conversation. Not exactly, you know, and nobody said it is, but you can see how it could be. It was one of the first few Will Smith films where I could really take him seriously as an actor. The next film is Spy Game. I would have to say this is my least favorite of all of his films because while the story is interesting and told all in flashbacks, it just felt false. The acting, particularly by Brad Pitt in certain in, well, not certain, most scenes, beat the devil. A story of James Brown, who apparently sold his soul to the devil years ago for international fame and stardom. And now that he's getting older, he can't do the moves anymore. So he wants to race the devil, played by Gary Oldman. And this is where really Tony Scott's hyperkinetic style started taking shape. Man on Fire, where he reteams once again with Denzel Washington. You got the return of Mickey Rourke. You have Christopher Walken. This film, I'm sorry, it's rip-roaring. It just shocked me. I have to say, it's pretty scary, but pretty impressive. Domino. Again, giving a young screenwriter a chance. This was after Richard Kelly had made the film Donnie Darko. One of the aspects I like about this film that pissed a lot of people off is that while it's crazy, and a lot of people didn't like the fact that half the scenes move, then rewind, is that you have to keep in mind that the whole story is being told by somebody who is tripping on drugs. Next is Deja Vu. Again, Denzel Washington. Can you talk about two people who belong together? I'm not the biggest fan of this film, but I can say it's an entertaining ride from beginning to end. The remake of Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, I mean, you're remaking a classic film, which apparently he wanted to do because he wanted to also remake The Warriors. I mean, he updated it, and again, with Denzel Washington, it has John Travolta as a villain. And then his final film, Unstoppable. Again, with Denzel Washington. I mean, it's an honorable film to be a last film, but it just somehow seems a little beneath him, even though probably in the 80s, this is probably the type of film he would have made anyway. And that ends our business for this week. But as you all know, there's always plenty of unfinished business. I have to ask, have you seen any of the great Tony Scott films I just mentioned? That will be my recommendation. Go out, go see the man's films, appreciate his work, because he will be missed, especially by not only his family, friends, and all those who knew him, but his great and many fans, of which I am glad to say I am a part of.